Yes.
Your comment on the UN declaration, the recent one that was voted down on the indigenous rights.
Yeah.
21 years in the making, the vote comes to pass, and guess who says no?
Mm-hmm. And that was the way with the Genocide Convention and lots of others too. Now, the consistent player there is going to be the United States. Canada's got a somewhat different record, but it's always aligned. Yeah, I used to do work in Geneva around that, and I, frankly, it requires something that I lack to be able to stick with that process. 19 goddamn years arguing with the U.S. and Canada about whether or not indigenous people were entitled to be called people, as opposed to populations. They absolutely refused to acknowledge a right to be referred to as peoples. Why? Because it's boilerplate language in international law. All peoples are entitled to exercise rights of self-determination, and they were not, while insisting that they already had, prepared to acknowledge that right. So finally, after 19 years, the U.S. opened the doors, so Canada went along, and Australia too, agreeing to use of the term peoples. There's a little caveat, kind of like footnote at the bottom of the page. Okay, they were consenting to the use of the term people so long as it was understood by all parties that it would have no legal connotation. Come up with this whole new thing of internal self-determination, they call it. What does internal self-determination mean? Well, it means that you're subsumed under one of these mega-states, whether the United States or Canada, or Australia for that matter, if you happen to be an Australian Aboriginal. You're subsumed under a state which will formulate policy, and you have a prerogative of implementing it in a manner according to your best sense of how it should be done. That's the opposite of the meaning of self-determination. What they did was just basically encrypt into that law license for the state to engage in internal colonization. This is a tricky history. We don't really want to go through a discourse on international law and the subterfuges involved in that, although we could. Okay? But that's a way of nullifying any alternative to the so-called blue water thesis. Or the United Nations Charter in 1960 on the Universal Declaration on Decolonization of all Universal Declaration on the Right to Independence of all colonized countries and peoples. That's how it goes. And there's a chaser to that one, but we can leave that, you know. They made it clear that colonialism, colonization, one people or country by the next, is illegal. It is not lawful. And if you are the power holding what's referred to as a non-self-governing territory, you are to inscribe that territory on a list maintained by the Secretariat and report on a regular basis as to the steps you've taken to restore full self-governance to that entity. Okay? Well, some of the newly decolonized African countries got really upset about that. And the reason was the boundaries of all of the African countries were drawn on a map in the partition of Africa in Berlin by the colonizing powers in 1885. Now, they had fought to liberate the Congo, but the Congo wasn't a reality other than a colonial map. There are a whole bunch of indigenous nations that have been incorporated into the Congo by the colonizing power of Belgium. Yet the newly decolonized liberation fighters were fighting for the notion of a state just the way they had been trained in Marxist academies. So if you acknowledge the right of all the indigenous peoples within the area known as the Congo, and I'm just picking the Congo as an example, this applies all through Africa. If you actually acknowledge the right of indigenous peoples to resume self-determining capacity as part of decolonization, you've just dissolved your own domain. And so they come up with this little proviso that a colony shall be understood to be a country or a people subjugated by another, separated from the colonizing power by at least 30 miles of open blue water. Yeah. Which of course would mean that the Germans did not colonize Poland in the Second World War, right? Or France. Couldn't have. There's no open blue water. There's no ocean water separating France from Germany or Poland from Germany. So I guess that whatever the Germans did wrong wouldn't be to violate these laws prohibiting colonization of other peoples. And the Germans thought they were colonizing. And the U.S. government puts out a publication in 1970 describing the situation of the Navajo people down in Arizona. It's called Navajo Nation, an American colony. Recognizing both, it's not a tribe or a band, but a nation of people, and it's colonized by the United States. Now, that's the official publication, but hey, the law no longer says that. Didn't at the time. So, yeah, the articulation of rights of international law of indigenous people, so-called, through this protracted process of abstraction by primarily the United States and Canada, and also Australia and New Zealand, and sometimes some other states, ends up being an articulation of the rights to the internal colonizers to maintain their colonial dominion. It's the opposite of what it appears to be. Neat trick, huh? Well, they often do that. Let me give a nice scholarly summation of the meaning of that. Here I'll steal a line from John Friedel. It's bullshit. Okay, that's the best you can say.
They did in section 3.2, rule out genocide. I was relieved to know I'd be here the next day.
Yeah, I can't commit genocide on you, but unless they're wearing brown shirts and jackboots and goose-stepping up and down the street, it's not going to be recognized as genocide. On the other hand, Pinochet kills some lefties and it becomes genocide. Now, the judge that made that ruling, actually, I agree with it, but it's still absurd on its face as compared to the things that they deny. He said that the political aggregates protected groups should never have been removed from the list of protected classes. Okay? Yeah, the judge, it was removed, so the law doesn't read that way, and here you're upholding a charge of genocide anyway, and yet you've got these blatant cases of genocide that you don't want to talk about. It works lots of strange ways. Well, that, by the way, was not a vote of support for Pinochet. Okay. Hanging that guy over a slow roasted bed of coals would have been charity as far as I'm concerned. Now, what about back? Anybody else got it?